Hello and good evening, everybody. Welcome to Dorset Careers Live. I'm Helen, I'm from the Dorset Local Enterprise Partnership, and I'm delighted to welcome you all this evening to the first in our webinars series. We're thrilled in the interest that we've had in this event, and we're looking forward to sharing with you what a career in Dorset can truly offer. So just to offer a very brief introduction and do a little bit of housekeeping. Dorset Careers Live is the work of the Dorset Careers Hub, and in particular our Cornerstone Employer Group, which is a collaboration across the region. In particular tonight, the NHS, as one of our cornerstone employers, are coming together to host this event, and we really are grateful to them for everything that they can offer. So this evening we'll start with a series of presentations that will share information about allied healthcare professions. So if that's what you're expecting, you are definitely in the right place. Our speakers this evening will talk to you about their job roles and provide some details of progression routes and the qualifications required to enter each of those pathways. In terms of a little bit of housekeeping, if you would like to ask a question this evening, we will have a dedicated period for questions towards the end of the session. So you'll hopefully see a Q&A box on your screen, and we'd really encourage you to pose any questions that you have for our speakers in the Q&A box, and we will collate those throughout this evening. And then my colleague Catherine will be posing them to our NHS colleagues at the end of the session. And this will also include any questions that you sent in advance. Just to point out, we will endeavour to cover as many questions as we possibly can, but we will prioritise those that are commonly asked or those that are most relevant to allied healthcare professions. And just wanted to mention on that point, just to manage some expectations, hopefully, as I say, you're in the right place. Our focus this evening is allied healthcare. We have had some inquiries and questions in advance about other progression opportunities and pathways within the NHS, such as medicine or nursing, midwifery, and that's absolutely fantastic, but we might not be able to cover all of those areas this evening. So if you do have questions regarding other career pathways, we will provide you some information at the end about how you can contact Join Our Dorset NHS and pose further questions, and we'll signpost you to sources of information. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Hilary, who's going to formally welcome us this evening.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for that lovely welcome, Helen, and it is an honour to be here with you all, and we're very proud to be able to represent our professions and tell you a little bit about the allied health professions. So I look forward to sharing with you all some experiences from several of us from the NHS, and I'll introduce people as we go through. But if I could just start off with myself. So my name, as I say, is Hilary. I am a physiotherapist. I trained in London many, many years ago, and I worked in London for some time, and I've worked in various places in south of England, and I've also worked in Toronto clinically. Ended up working in Poole and loving Poole, and developed from having a clinical career into a management career, and then more into a leadership career. And I'm currently the Dorset Lead Allied Health Professional. And my role is very strategic and offer professional support to the organisations in Dorset, as well as local universities. Next slide. So I wanted to give you a little bit of introduction to the allied health professions, because some of you won't have heard that terminology before. We understand nurses, we understand doctors and things like that, but the allied health professions are a group of 14 distinct professions, and this slide here lists all of the professions that are included within this group. And today we're going to be lucky enough to hear a little bit more detail from therapy, radiography, orthoptics, dietetics and podiatry. And I will leave it to my colleagues to explain a little bit more about those professions for you. But before we hear from them, I'm going to give you a bit of a background and an overview of allied health professions. Next slide. So collectively, the allied health professions take up about a third of the workforce within the NHS. So it is a big group of professionals. But as well as working within the NHS, allied health professionals work within social services. So for example, the occupational therapists work within social services. Speech therapists work within education settings. Dietitians can work in industry, and radiographers can work in industry. And many of the allied health professions also work within private settings as well as the NHS. So there are a variety of sectors and settings that you will find the allied health professions working within. Generally speaking, we break down into two sort of broad groups of AHPs. Some are rehabilitation focused, and those professions will be helping patients to recover and rehabilitate following an illness or an injury, and this will be patients of all ages. And others are more sort of technical focused, including the radiographers, and they'll be working on sort of diagnosis of injuries and illnesses, as well as treatment for cancer and things like that. So there's quite a range of focus that our professions are supporting. And however, we do use our skills to sort of work independently and undertake assessments that help us to form a diagnosis. And that is a common attribute of all allied health professionals. Next slide. So thinking about the 14 different and distinct professions, but there are common characteristics and qualities of all of the professions. And this slide really nicely illustrates what makes a good AHP. Very much team members. So although you have a distinct and unique profession, often you're working as part of a team. You're working alongside doctors and nurses and things like that. But what is key and essential is your ability to communicate and engage with people, notably patients. You do need to be able to develop a rapport and gain trust from a patient, and you need to be able to sort of understand and empathize with them. So a lot of these attributes here are relevant to all of the professions. And the other thing that I've touched upon is about making assessments and being able to make decisions based upon your assessment. So you're expected to be able to work quite independently. You need to be able to problem solve and think about what's in front of you in terms of what you're seeing the patient has got, and be able to make some decisions upon that. And you do need to have a degree of self-confidence in being able to act upon those decisions in terms of what you think the next steps are for that patient. As well as the self-confidence, so you really need to be able to understand what your limitations are. So you've got to have a relatively high degree of self-awareness about what you're able to achieve and deliver, and where you might need to get some help from other people. Next slide. So today's session is focusing on those people who are leaving school and thinking of becoming an allied health professional. However, this slide shows that there are many other opportunities for people later on in life to change and become an allied health professional. And so it is an amazing opportunity for people, but today we do really want to just focus on those people leaving school and how to become an AHP. Next slide. So the top two sort of rows talk about what happens in terms of after leaving school and in year 13. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute on the next slide, but I want to spend a couple of minutes talking about what we can do in years 9 to 11 in terms of starting to get ourselves ready for becoming an AHP once you have a better idea of the kind of profession you want to do. And I would suggest in these years it's really important to make sure you keep a broad range of interests. Make sure that you have a really nice range of activities that you're interested in, that you're involved in, and also the same with your subjects that you cover at school. You know, have a broad range of subjects, but obviously for the AHPs you do need to have a science background. So alongside the schooling side of things and whatever activities and hobbies and interests you have, you can now start to think about what other things will help you to develop and help improve your opportunities to become an AHP. And this is where things like volunteering can be extremely useful. And I always say about volunteering, you start to improve your confidence, you start to improve your communication skills, including the listening skills, and you can start to develop empathy and that kind of stuff. So working in a voluntary capacity for an organisation that's particularly helping people is a really valuable thing to do. We also do suggest, if you can get some work experience or work shadow, then that is a great opportunity as well. It's not always easy to do that, and so sometimes we do hear that it's difficult to do that. It doesn't have to be following the profession that you're particularly interested in. Work experience within an NHS setting is often really helpful, because you might be observing AHPs in action, or sort of like listening and hear about things. So it doesn't always have to be directly with the AHP profession that you want to do. But what we do encourage is, during these early years and also into the later years at school, start to keep a note of the things that you have experienced and what you have learned from them. Because if you can start to develop a little record of things that have happened along the way that have made you think about why you'd like to become one of the HP professions, it's a really useful thing to do, because it helps to demonstrate your learning. Once you get to the point of thinking about it more seriously, you do need to have a degree to become a qualified AHP. And this is through an approved programme at a university. The universities are mostly 3-year programmes, and they're based in a university. However, you will undertake clinical placements in local organisations near to the university, but sometimes a little bit further afield. Some of the HP professions do have an apprenticeship route, which is becoming increasingly popular. And this is whereby you can be employed by an organisation, and you work in that organisation sort of 2 to 3 days a week, and you will spend 2 days a week at a local university. Now, this way of undertaking a degree is longer, and there aren't many professions doing that yet. And a third option that people have got that they can consider once they've finished school is working as a support worker. So you don't need to have a degree to do this, but you can work alongside dietitians or physiotherapists or occupational therapists. And whilst you're in that role, you will get training within that role, within that job. And many of the support workers do often later on decide to go and become qualified AHPs. Next slide. So once you have qualified as an AHP, normally what happens, you do spend the first few years consolidating your clinical experience and skills and working within a clinical setting. However, after that, there are many opportunities that you can branch out into, and this slide just nicely depicts where you can go. So it's from my own personal experience, I've followed a managerial leadership route, but there are others who've gone into universities to help with teaching future AHPs. Many AHPs have gone into sort of having quite significant roles in helping with public health and promoting good health for the population, research and entrepreneurship. So there are many opportunities that you can branch out into once you have qualified as an allied health professional. Next slide. So that's just to give a very brief overview of some aspects of being a allied health professional, but I'm really delighted to welcome 4 colleagues from Dorset who are going to now talk a little bit about their own personal AHP profession. And we're going to start with Charlotte, who's a therapeutic radiographer from Poole Hospital.
Hi, as mentioned, I'm Charlotte. I'm a therapeutic radiographer, and what that means is that I try and effectively the aim of my job is to try and treat cancer with radiation. So we can also use it to try and help with symptom control for patients who are struggling slightly. But the main bulk of my job is we use a big machine called a linear accelerator, and it delivers really high energy X-rays. And what that does is we can specifically target the tumour within a patient, and we can be really specific to a few millimetres around that area that we want to treat. And we can give really high doses of radiation. And that means that gradually, so patients normally they can have anywhere from 1 treatment up to about 35. And they come in Monday to Friday, every day. And each day that we give a little bit more radiation to the patient and to that specific tumour, it damages those cancer cells. And over time, with each treatment, the more damage that's done, those cells can't repair themselves. So this means that those cells gradually die off, which is the aim of the treatment. So overall, hopefully, we try and get rid of the tumour. Obviously, with that, in order to get the radiation to the area that we want it to be, we have to go through some healthy tissue as well. And this is what causes side effects for our patients. And if you can imagine, say, if we're treating a tumour that's in the brain or anywhere in the head and neck region, there's lots of really important structures there that we don't want to damage. So this is where it comes in. We have to be very precise and specific and work with our physics team and work with the doctors to ensure that we're only delivering the radiation specifically where we want it to be. So the type of person that this job is really good for is anybody who enjoys the technical side. So we get to work with machines, and I've got a model here. So the machine looks something like this. And it moves all the way around the patient. So anybody that's technically minded, it's great for, because you get to use all these advancing techniques, and it's constantly developing, and there's loads of new techniques and ways to improve treatment for patients. But also there's the opposite side of it, which is it's a really caring side. So because we're seeing these patients on a day-to-day basis, and obviously they're not going through a very nice time in their life, we really have to be there for them, and we build up a really nice rapport with these patients. And some of them who are coming for really long treatment schedules, who are, say, coming to us every day for 6 weeks, you really get to know them, and it's actually quite nice, and it's a very rewarding job. So as I said, there's a very technical side to it, but there's also the caring side. So personally for me, I decided to go into this job because I knew I wanted to do something in the healthcare industry, but I wasn't entirely sure what I wanted to do. So I ended up looking around a range of mainly allied health profession jobs and seeing what they offered. And I looked at both diagnostic and therapy radiography. And I decided to go for the therapeutic route, mainly because of the getting to see a patient on a day-to-day basis and really getting to know them. Whereas obviously the diagnostic side is more, you see that patient for one scan and then you may not sort of see them again, obviously, unless they come for another scan. So that was why I went into it. So I picked my A-levels based around that. So I did maths, chemistry, biology and German, so quite a mixed range. And as Hilary said, as long as you've got a science background, the other sort of GCSEs or A-levels that you pick isn't too much of an issue. And so yeah, I did that, and then I went to university in Bristol for 3 years. And our placement, so we have half and half between university lectures and placements at hospitals, which is great because obviously the job's very practical, so you get to experience what it's actually going to be like. So next slide, please. Thank you. And so the university course is the most common entry pathway into becoming a therapeutic radiographer. As I said, it's 3 years, and there's not that many universities that offer it, just because it is quite a specialist course, but they are sort of spread across the UK, so there are lots of options with that. And the next slide, please. So there is also an apprenticeship scheme which is being rolled out currently. It's been approved. However, at the moment, I'm not sure there's any departments that are offering it. But I think in the next sort of year or two, this is something that they're looking at. So obviously this is where you'll be in a hospital setting, full-time, working, and then going to university and doing studying sort of on top of that. Obviously, whereas if you go to university, the university is the more prominent aspect of that. But yes, there's those two different options. So I think the degree apprenticeship will be coming out quite soon. If you sort of don't want to do the university aspect of it, we do have some radiography assistants which sort of help us, and they still do a lot of the technical things. It is more of a diagnostic job. We don't have that many centres that do have radiography assistants, but if you are interested in the therapeutic side of it, there definitely are places that do offer that as a job. So that's a good sort of thing to look at if you are interested but you're not sure if you want to go to university. Next slide, please. So there's lots of career progression aspects to this job. There's quite a few avenues in radiotherapy that you can branch off into. You can become a review radiographer who takes more of a nursing, caring sort of aspect to the job and looks at side effects and things like that. Or you can go to the technical side and look at the machines and technique developments. Or you can go to leadership and management. There's a lot that you can do with it. So there's lots of progression that you can go from. Okay. So yeah, that's really an overview of what I do. And it's a really interesting job. Yeah, so I hope some of you consider it in the future.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much, Charlotte. That's really, really helpful and a huge amount of information there. I'm now going to hand over to Vicky, who's going to talk to us a little bit about podiatry.
Hi there. So I'm a podiatrist, and that used to be called a chiropodist, but most people think of chiropody as cutting toenails, but there's a bit more to it than that. So next slide, please. So what do podiatrists do? Well, basically, the aim of a podiatrist is to keep people moving in the long term. And there's lots of different sides to podiatry, which is why I think it's quite exciting. Next slide, please. Just as Hilary and Charlotte mentioned, you need to complete a recognised degree or podiatry apprenticeship. And we haven't mentioned actually so far, but the Health and Care Professions Council are the ones who register all allied health professions, and the degree or apprenticeship has to be recognised by them as well. And it's the way to make sure that standards stay as they should do. Next slide, please. So as you saw on there, you can come into podiatry through degree route or through an apprenticeship route. But once you have qualified, there are lots of different ways that you can work. So you can work in the NHS, which is what I do. Within the NHS, you could become an advanced practitioner working within a specialist role, and that's something I do. You can run your own business and be a private practitioner. You can go into medical sales, you can be a lecturer. Next slide, please. You can be a self-employed locum, so basically people contract you to work in, again, in private practice, private hospitals, sometimes actually in NHS as well. You could work overseas. Funnily enough, a lot of cruise ships have private podiatrists on them. You can become an NHS consultant podiatrist, and you can also become a surgical podiatrist. Next slide, please. We mentioned money because everybody wants to know what sort of things they can earn and where they can get to. So in the NHS, there's a banding sort of level to your progression. And this is pretty much the same for most professions in the NHS. So as a newly qualified podiatrist, you'd be earning anywhere from 24,000 to 30,000. And then you can go up the bandings. So you can see there that you can go all the way up to 103,000. I'm not quite there yet. Next slide, please. But as well as the NHS, you can go into private practice. And it's difficult to sort of give you a general idea of how much, what the earnings are, because it depends on how successful you are as a private practitioner, how successful your business is, because you're a clinician and you're also running a business. So this just gives a little kind of insight into the possible earnings that you may get. Next slide, please. So I think podiatry is a brilliant career if you're interested in science, biology, chemistry or medicine. I also think actually if you're a bit creative, podiatry is quite a good thing. So if you like your sciences and you're creative, podiatry is quite a good thing to get into. As Hilary had already spoken about, you need to be caring, you need to be self-reliant, because you definitely are on your own making decisions a lot. But again, you also need to be a good team player, because you're going to be working with doctors, GPs, nurses. In the hospital where I work, you're working with the consultants and with lots of other different NHS workers. You need to be analytical. You also need to be curious, not take things at face value. Next slide, please. So how did I come into podiatry? Well, if I'm honest, I didn't actually know what a podiatrist did when I started my training. But the more I got into my training, the more delighted I was, because I found out I was doing all sorts of things. So I went to Plymouth, first of all, to do my degree in podiatry. And then I was lucky enough, and I was always interested in diabetes. So I was lucky enough to get a job within the hospitals, specialising in diabetes. But I've also specialised in rheumatology. I've made insoles, that's where your creativity bit comes in. I've done talks to patients and other health professions. I've done talks at national conferences. I've done nail surgery. I've managed a team of podiatrists. I left the NHS for a little while and was a private practitioner for a while, and I did a lot of biomechanics. So biomechanics basically is the science of movement, how people walk, what you have to do, literally what muscles have to fire for you to actually take a step, that sort of thing, and why it goes wrong. So that's all biomechanics. So I did a bit of that. But eventually I came back to my first love of diabetes. And now I'm an advanced practitioner specialising in diabetes. So I've actually gone on and done some extra training. So I've done something called my non-medical prescribers course. And now I prescribe for my patients. And I love what I do. So that's all there is. Well, there's a lot more about podiatry, and there's a few places you can go to. So I would definitely recommend going and having a look at careers in podiatry on the net, because there's a lot of information there, and also people talking about, so students talking about their studying, and people who've done the apprenticeship talking about how that's gone for them. And yeah, so do look into it. It's an exciting career. Thank you.
So my name's Emma, I'm a dietitian, and a bit like Vicky actually, I also work in diabetes, so that's quite interesting. And so I work for Dorset County Hospital, and I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about a career in dietetics. So if we start with what is a dietitian, so I've got a definition up on the screen from the British Dietetic Association, who are the Association of Dietitians in the UK. And so I will just read that out rather than reinvent the wheel there. So dietitians are qualified and regulated health professionals that assess, diagnose and treat dietary and nutrition problems at an individual and wider public health level. And we'll go into talk about how we do that as we move through the slides. So a few of us already have talked about sort of entry routes into our professions. So there are two types of courses to become a dietitian. There's an undergraduate and a postgraduate programme. So probably here you might be most interested in the undergraduate programme, which is 3 or 4 year course. Quite a lot of the courses are now moving to 3 years. The A levels that you require for this course just need to include really a biology and a chemistry A level, or something that's equivalent, such as a foundation course in science, foundation degree rather, or an access to science course. it's worth looking on the individual university websites for their particular sort of grade and course requirements, because they are a little bit different. But there are quite a few universities across the UK offering these courses. A few people have mentioned apprenticeships, which I think is something to come in the future. But I would say that all of these courses, a big part of it, as we've already mentioned, is a placement. And so you get to have sort of clinical experience in a hospital or in a doctor's surgery. And actually a big part of what I like about my job is training students and our future dietitians. So we all do that in practice in the NHS. And as other people have mentioned, actually you need to be registered with the Health and Care Professions Council to use the title dietitian. It is a protected title. So that's something that we are quite proud of as dietitians. And the slide I've got up here for you now, I thought was quite nice to demonstrate what dietitians do. And it's from a recent social media campaign from Dietitians Week. So this is from the VDA as well. So it's just showing all the areas that you can progress with dietetics. So some dietitians work in the NHS like I do, so in hospitals, in doctors' surgeries and with patients in their own homes. Other dietitians work at a public health level, thinking generally about everyone's diet and improving that for the population. We've also got dietitians in industry, so they can have an influence on food and drink that we buy, that we eat at restaurants. So we've got an influence there. But also if you've got an interest in sport, dietitians can work in sport as well. And quite importantly in research. So we're always learning new things. Nutrition is quite a new science. But we also work in the media, which is quite important. There's lots of different things out there in the media about food and about nutrition. I think it's something everyone's got an opinion on because we all eat. So it's important for dietitians to get out there and just make sure that the nutrition information people receive is accurate. So there's lots of different avenues we can go down with dietetics. So that's why it's a great choice for a career. And so I'll just talk to you a little bit about how I got into dietetics. So I started with A-levels, as I've mentioned before, in biology and in chemistry. And I then did an undergraduate degree at Cardiff Metropolitan University, which was 4 years at the time. I think it might be 3 now. And after that, I actually worked as a dietetic assistant to get a bit of experience really before my first job as a dietitian. They now call this role a dietetic support worker, which some people have mentioned already. So I've been a dietitian for about 5 years. Firstly, I was lucky to work in my local hospital, which is a district general, a little bit like the one I work for now. And it just gave me a really good range of experiences. I was mostly working on the wards in the hospital with patients that were malnourished and helping them to achieve their nutrition goals in a sort of nutrition support capacity. I worked quite a lot with patients with lung conditions, but also older people, people with swallowing difficulties for various reasons. They might have had a stroke or have a condition like motor neurone disease or multiple sclerosis that might affect their swallow. Worked with patients requiring tube feeding as well, and generally problems with their guts. So I've worked with patients with celiac disease and inflammatory bowel disease. So there's lots of different areas to cover, but most recently, over the last year, I've specialised in diabetes, and that's something that I really love. I get to, before COVID, I get to go out and see people in surgeries, in doctor surgeries, on a one-to-one basis, in groups and in their own home. And now we're doing a lot of that work by telephone or virtually, but we're still able to reach those people. So what I love about my job is meeting people and the variety. And my advice to you would be to keep an open mind, because diabetes isn't something I wanted to specialise in to begin with, but I found that actually I love what I do at the moment.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much, Emma. Such a huge amount of information there, which is fantastic. I'm now going to pass over to our final speaker, which is Julie. Thank you, Julie.
Hi, so my name's Julie. I'm head orthoptist at Royal Bournemouth Hospital. Dare I say they've saved the best profession till last. I think I can get away with that one. So what is an orthoptist? No one ever knows. There's a big publicity campaign been going on in the last couple of years to say what are orthoptists. And so we are experts in diagnosing and treating defects in eye movements and problems with how the eyes work together. We work in the NHS, in hospitals, in community clinics. We work very closely as a multidisciplinary team with ophthalmologists who are eye consultants and optometrists, the people who you see in the high street who test you for glasses, but also do other roles in a hospital. We also work out in schools. We test all the reception age children. Very proud to say in Dorset we have a gold level standard, and we screen 8,000 children across the schools here. And we also assess children within special schools who are much more prone to having problems with their eyes and their developments. We see children of all ages. So we start off, I can see a child in my clinic who's a couple of days old, right through to someone at the end of life. So we treat every aspect of the population. I'm not going to go into money because working within the NHS, all AHPs are banded under Agenda for Change, and that's been covered in Vicky's slides earlier. But entry level is at a band 5. I'm an 8B, I manage a service across Dorset, and I also manage the optometry service. So the slides are all there. There's lots of information and pictures on there, but I'd rather talk to you and explain it more as I would explain to a parent. So what happens when you're born? You have 2 eyes that roughly point in the right direction, that roughly have a visual field, so what you can see out of each eye that overlaps, and they point roughly in the right direction. You learn to see through the first days, weeks and months and years of life, and it is vital that we see children at that very early stage, hence seeing babies from days old. The brain learns to see, so the eye itself is the focusing, but the brain is actually differentiates with what you are seeing, and that's how your vision develops. And that develops throughout the first 8 to 10 years of life, but the most important time is the very early years. So that's where a lot of my work is targeted at the under 8 population to make sure that they achieve the best possible vision. We deal with squints. Now that is not screwing up your eyes and looking into the sunshine, but it's where the eyes don't point in the same direction. And you can have an eye that turns inwards, it turns outwards, it can go up, it can go down. It can just happen for one position that you're looking at, so for near or for distance, or it can happen because you get tired. But all of these reflexes that need to control the eyes need to be strong. And what we do is help strengthen those reflexes and make sure that the eyes develop normally. Next slide, please. So we are eye and vision specialists. If you have double vision, if you have a squint, if you have a droopy eyelid, if you have uncontrolled eye movements, you need to be referred into a hospital clinic to be assessed. As I say, our caseload is made up of patients of all ages, and we are autonomous. We take direct referrals, we see, we diagnose and we treat. We refer on if we have to, if a consultant ophthalmologist input is required. But in these days where we have shortages of doctors, orthoptists are now taking on lots of extended roles. So although your core training will be in vision and muscle balance, we now take on roles in glaucoma, a condition where you have raised pressure in the eye, in diabetes. You've already heard 2 of my colleagues talking about their roles in diabetes. anyone with an endocrine problem such as thyroid problems, neurological conditions, multiple sclerosis, stroke. So we see patients across the whole range of the hospital patients. Next slide, please. There's plenty of opportunity to specialise because of this. So in Bournemouth, we have an orthoptist who specialises in stroke. She visits the ward. She has outpatient clinics. We do telephone consultations, and lots of those since COVID has been around. And the reason that we are so involved in the neurological conditions is that seeing is not the eye. The eye is just the receiver for the image. If you have a problem with your vision development, it's at a brain level. So it's much more a neurological condition of vision problems than anything else. We may be the first point of contact for somebody that has a significant problem such as multiple sclerosis or has developed a brain tumour. And what often happens is that their vision is affected or their eye movements are affected. They may get double vision, and so they pitch up to us with a, I don't know what's going on, and we look for the subtle signs that indicate there is something more serious that needs more investigation. An example of that is a child seen recently who came in, suddenly developed one eye turning inwards, a bit off balance, generally under the weather, not the happy child they were. They actually had a very small brain tumour and that needed urgent treatment. So we see all sorts. Next slide, please. As I've said, we see children with special educational needs. There's a much higher incidence of squint and amblyopia, which is when the vision doesn't develop normally, and also brain impairment, which means that you're not able to see because the brain doesn't register the images correctly. And we do everything we can to improve everything to the best possible ability that that child can develop to their best ability. An example of that is 2 to 5% of the general population have a squint. As I said earlier, we screen all the children in reception year at school, so that's the 4 to 5 year olds. We refer in 10% year on year of children who have an undetected visual problem that, if left uncorrected, will cause a permanent impairment to their sight. So it's vitally important that the orthoptists are getting out there and seeing these patients. Next slide, please. So did you know you have 6 muscles on each eye and they have to be coordinated? They are innervated by 3 cranial nerves, which also operate the iris, so the pupil reactions, and your upper eyelid. So what kind of movements can an eye have? Well, you need to be able to look to the sides. You need to be able to look up and down. You need to pull both eyes inwards to look at something close to you and to relax them again to look at something in the distance. Those are just the normal eye muscle movements that we look at, and any defect of any one of those muscles will throw out the balance and lead to double vision and a squint. There are other sorts of movements that you have. We call them smooth pursuits. So if you're watching somebody slowly walk down a corridor, your smooth pursuit movements allow you to track that person. If suddenly something catches your eye, you'll make a quick, what we call a jerk movement, a saccadic movement, and that's controlled by another brain route for controlling eye movements. And the third one is your head movement. So if you shake your head, your eyes don't move. Sometimes if you shake your head, your eyes do move, and you need to be able to control when that is needed to happen. So any defects of any of those movement orders will give you problems that mean you need to see an orthoptist. Next slide, please. This is just a slide to demonstrate more with our adult patients that we see. So patients that have had strokes or head injuries, or perhaps an assault on a punch to the eye can cause a problem with the eye socket. So what do we do with these patients? Well, we can patch them. So this next slide, you can see a little girl, she's wearing a lovely bright pink patch. Patching is done for 2 reasons. It's in a child, it's done to improve the sight in the uncovered eye. So you're forcing it to work and making it develop. Or we can also use that to get rid of double vision. So you prevent the image from causing people to see 2 of everything. We can give prisms that makes the brain think the eyes are straight, or we can exercise the eyes, encourage them to work harder. We can give exercises to improve the control of the eyes. We can use botulinum toxin. We might use it for our wrinkles, but actually you can inject it into a single eye muscle and cause a weakness of a muscle that's working too hard. And obviously we can then refer on for surgery. So this slide demonstrates why I love my job. So this little girl, Amelia, at 2, the very first picture, she developed a squint. Mum was concerned, took her to her optician, and glasses were prescribed because she was very long-sighted and more so in one eye than the other, which meant she was looking with the best eye and the other one got weak. She was referred into Orthoptics. We treated her vision, we monitored it with patching, we improved it to a good level. Unfortunately, Amelia's squint wasn't fully corrected by her glasses. So as you can see in the third picture, she's grown out of the need for her glasses, but she's still got an obvious squint. You can see her left eye, so the eye on the right as you're looking at the picture, is looking in towards her nose. So Amelia had successful surgery, and the last picture shows her with her lovely straight eyes. So squints may just be seen as cosmetic. It's more than that. Eye contact is really important for people's self-esteem, and it can lead to issues in later life. So if you fancy a career in healthcare, what about Orthoptics? So it's a 3-year degree course, very similar to the courses that have been described already. They only have 3 universities in the country that runs: Sheffield and Liverpool within England, and a 4-year course in Glasgow, which has some combined elements to with audiology. Entry requirements are usually 3 Bs at A-level, and the course itself is, as I say, a 3-year course with clinical placements. Every place I have worked, which is 5 different hospitals, 4 in this area, I have had this department accredited to take students. So we are a clinical placement site. In my 15 years here, I have had 5 staff as homegrown talent, literally from the going to a careers evening, we're interested, come and sit in, see what we do. They've loved it, they've gone on, and I've employed them. And I still employ 3 of those people now. There currently isn't an apprenticeship route in. It's something that we're looking at, but we're quite a small profession. And at the moment, the degree courses, there's enough trainees for those courses to run to fill the need for the employment that we have. But there are grants available for all of the NHS careers, so that you can have a grant to help you with your fees. Blocks of clinical placements happen all over the country. You don't have to come home to come to a placement, but you can visit all sorts of hospitals, including the one that everyone's heard of, Moorfields. You can have a clinical placement site there and experience really complex, difficult stuff. And then you can come to a community place and see normal orthoptics. Our social media links are on the last page, so please have a look, consider it. It's a fabulous career, and I would not make any other choices. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Julie. I'm just looking at the time, so before we go to our Q&A, I'm going to just hand back to Hilary, who's just going to offer you some web links for a bit of signposting.
And I just also wanted to give a massive personal thanks to Charlotte, Vicky, Emma and Julie. You really did manage to convey your passion and your love for your careers, and I'm sure you will have inspired many people. There's so much we could tell you about allied health professions, and we've touched upon it today, but these links here will give you far more information about the ones that you've heard about today, and also the professions that we haven't been able to talk about. So please go away and have a look at these and really get to understand more about the opportunities that you could have if you did choose a career as one of the allied health professions. Thank you so much.
Brilliant, thank you, Hilary. So we are going to now have a short Q&A session. So I'm going to hand over to Catherine, who's hosting our questions. They've been coming through in the Q&A box, and we're going to pose a few of those to our speakers, as well as some of those that you sent in advance. So over to you, Catherine.
Thank you, and thank you to our speakers, because one of the delights is that your information has been so detailed that the number of questions has been much reduced compared to normal times, so that's good. So the first question, Hilary, I'm just going to direct to you, and you might direct it onto, which was, what effect has the current issues with NHS funding, staffing, etc., had on whether you recommend these careers?
Sorry, could you repeat the last bit, Catherine?
Yeah, so it's just talking about the funding. What effect has the current issues with NHS funding and staffing, etc., had on whether someone recommends these careers to individual students? So is there an impact? Is NHS recruiting? Where are we now at the moment?
I think, well, hopefully through the presentations, you'll actually have heard that the career opportunities for these professions are not just within the NHS. And so there are alternative career pathways for each of these professions other than the NHS. However, the NHS has over history gone through periods of funding and little funding. So I think at the moment, I would say that the allied health professions at the moment are relatively high profile, and there's quite a lot of interest in supporting these careers and these professions. So some of the issues is more about generating enough interest in school leavers and people to go onto the university programs. So I'm not convinced that the issues with the NHS funding at the moment would deter people from going into a career in the NHS. We will always need to maintain healthy people in Britain. There will always be a role to play. And from what you've heard tonight, you'll understand the actual specific benefit that these professions can give to people with particular needs. So I wouldn't let the funding in the NHS put anybody off going into a career in the health professions at all.
Thank you very much for that. That's a strong answer to the question. There's another question that's come through about work experience, because people are always encouraged to participate in work experience to going into. So I don't know whether any of the other panel want to say how easy is it to secure work experience, and if someone's keen to go into your career area, what opportunities can they do to kind of improve their knowledge and their insight?
I mean, I'm happy to answer that one again.
Thank you.
It's a little tricky. Ideally, students would love to have some work experience before applying to universities, and it can be a little bit challenging because many of the organisations are already supporting students, so offering work experience can be tricky. But and what we generally say is, and I said it at the beginning, you don't have to necessarily have work experience shadowing somebody of the profession you want to be in, but if you can get some general work experience within an environment where there is care being delivered to people, then that can be really helpful as well. We also work with universities and ask them to be a bit more open about what kind of work experience and what opportunities they will look for, and particularly in terms of physiotherapy can be really difficult to get work experience in. So when I work with local universities and say, don't be too rigid on the expectation of work experience. So it is something that is a tricky area to cover sometimes, but there are local departments who sometimes can offer work experience, so don't be deterred by it, but it isn't the be all and end all to getting onto a university program. And we're now going to start looking at virtual opportunities and things like that, so we can move away from the physical work experience to look at other ways of gaining experience in the profession before you apply for a university degree.
Thank you. That's been really helpful and insightful. Emma, I've got a question for you that's come through previous to the screening of this, and that was just asking about becoming a dietitian. What A-levels are good to have? I know that you said you had biology and chemistry, but for many professions, is it precise that they have particular qualifications? So perhaps you could answer for dietitian, your particular role, but also for anyone else, really.
Yeah, so I think the A-levels that they do specifically want is the science-based ones, because there is a lot of science in the course. So biology and chemistry are ones that the university courses will be looking for. But as I briefly mentioned earlier, there are sort of some equivalent courses if your A-levels isn't the route you're going down. So you can do sort of a foundation degree in science, or there are some access to science courses for people who aren't doing A-levels. But specifically, we do need those sciences because it is a science-based profession, really. So that's the sort of requirements that they'd be looking for. So it's definitely one to think about if you want a career as a dietitian.
Thank you. That's really good. And I'm just going to ask another question, really, for anybody on the panel. Someone's just written in and asked about, do we have any more information on non-university, non-A-level routes or careers? So is there any way that an individual could go into any of the professions you've talked about this afternoon or this evening without having those A-level routes? So is the progression within the organisation and the area that you've talked about?
So if I pick that one up as well.
Thank you.
So I would suggest if you look at the links that we've got at the end of the presentation, it will help to direct you into the various professions, and then you'll be able to find out a little bit more about which of the professions are offering that route, because as we said, it's not all of the 14 professions at the moment. So physiotherapy, occupational therapy, podiatry are, and some of the others are as well. But as somebody mentioned previously, whilst they've had the approval to run these type of programs, they're not necessarily up and running yet. So I would suggest going onto those websites to get the latest information about what's happening with those.
Thank you. Thank you. And then I've got quite a few questions that people have asked about preparing now, like getting ready. And that's fantastic because many schools have been encouraging students to get ready for their future careers. So is there anything someone's written in to say I can be doing at the moment or in the near future to help me prepare? So that might not be just study, it might be other opportunities or things they can do to help build their profile to get into one of the professions you've talked about this evening.
I think a key theme that has come through the presentations is about the communication, the caring, but also the working independently and working independently, but also as part of a team. So whatever young people can do to help build up their confidence and experience in those kind of areas, they'll be able to bring into their application forms, and they'll be able to bring it into their application for the university programme. So I think it's really important to make sure that you have as broad an experience and opportunities as you can do, and you don't focus too specifically on one thing like sport or anything like that, so that you can demonstrate a breadth of experience and feeling when you go into that university application process.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And some people have talked also about volunteering because we've had a really strong view on sort of social action and volunteering. So are there opportunities within your areas to get involved and do volunteering, or is there any volunteering elsewhere that you would recommend? You know, and that's open to the whole of the panel, really.
I mean, I can answer that one again. Volunteering is a really, really, really useful thing to do. It could be working in care homes, it could be working in other organisations, it could be working in special schools, it could be working in hospitals. So you need to check on the requirements in terms of age and that kind of stuff, but there must be, and I don't know the answer to this, but we must be able to help signpost people to the volunteering opportunities. But I think it's a massively valuable experience for people.
Thank you, thank you. And I'm just going to ask Charlotte, if you could just talk about your career and how stressful that is. A lot of people have asked questions about how stressful is your job. So that's a $1 million question, isn't it? But it's just whether that's useful for people to know. Is working in the NHS or allied healthcare professions a stressful job, or does it have its moments? Some feedback on that would be really good for people who have asked that question.
So generally, I find from my perspective, working in the NHS and in healthcare in general, it can be quite stressful, but you do find ways to manage that, and it's really good to be able to go home at the end of the day and be able to switch off and find something else that you can focus on so you don't think about work. But also while you're in work, you've got your team around you who really sort of motivate you through it, and like I said, you get to know all your patients and they motivate you through it as well, and so you can come into work and you know that you get to see all these lovely people each day. So that really has a bigger impact on my day than thinking about being stressed or time constraints or anything like that. So really the stress gets put to the back because you do focus on the person.
That's perfect. Fantastic answer. I need to listen to that. It's great. I'm just going to now hand over to Helen, who I know just has a few words to finish.
Brilliant. Thank you, Catherine. And thank you to everybody who has put forward questions this evening, and of course to our panel for their contributions and responses. So I'm just going to quickly tie up this evening, and I just want to start with two really big thank yous. The first to all of you for tuning in and for joining us. This was a pilot event, and so we really are grateful for you, taking an interest and joining us on this journey this evening. And then our other huge thank you, of course, goes to our NHS colleagues who you've seen throughout this evening, and also Jackie, who's pulled this all together for us. So a huge thank you. You will get the slides retrospectively via email, so you can digest all that information. If you have further questions, as we've mentioned, please do go to the Join Our Dorset contact page. And I just wanted to also signpost you to the web link at the bottom of this slide. We have recently launched a labour market information dashboard, and it's focused on health and social care across Dorset and what the opportunities are and what the labour market really looks like in this area. So we'd absolutely encourage you to take a look at that. And finally, we've spoken quite a lot about the fact that this is our first webinar. We do intend to continue the Dorset Careers Live series, looking at other sectors, and our cornerstone employers would all love the opportunity to contribute. So following this evening's webinar, you will receive an email with a link to a short evaluation survey. I know sometimes these things take a few minutes, but we would be really, really grateful for any thoughts and feedback that you can offer. Thanks very much, and hopefully we'll see you at another Dorset Careers Live event in the future. Bye-bye.